Okay, happy February 20th, everyone. Welcome to WSSDA InSession Live. We are at the end of week 6 of the legislative session. Got some good updates for you today. Before we dive in and get started, just want to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A question and answer box to jump in with any questions that you might have for us throughout the time. We will be watching and monitoring that space, and we'll either answer questions live if we've got the answers for you. And if we don't, we'll make sure to take those down and follow up with you after the fact. But please use that box if you have anything you want to contribute. Per usual, we will spend our time sort of diving into week 6, things that happen and things we learned this week. We'll then spend some time talking about what we know about week 7. We'll share some updated resources with you at the end and have some suggested action items for you to bring back to your school board and district teams at the local level. So, thinking about week 6, there were a couple of things that happened this week. We spent some time both sort of on the floor with legislators as House and Senate, full chambers, full bodies were debating bills to advance at the beginning of the week on Monday and Tuesday. On Tuesday, February 17th, we had the House of Origin floor cut off. And essentially, what that means is that any bill that is not directly tied to the budget, that did not advance with a vote of either the full House or the full Senate, did not continue through the process. That meant a number of bills were removed from our bill watch list. We're going to get into sort of some key bills that are still in play and some key bills that did not advance after the February 17th cutoff. But want to let you know first and foremost that we have 40 bills that remain on our bill watch list. Some of the bills that are still in play, these are sort of the bills that we are most closely watching and working on that are continuing through this session. There are a couple of them that touch on sales tax exemptions for K through 12 as a result of last year's Senate Bill 5814, the new taxes that have come down on you all around temporary staffing and live presentations. Jumping in, Debbie, we can absolutely send out a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, we can. So there are a couple of bills that remain in play here. The one that is currently sort of the best language and the preference of WSSDA as an organization is the first one listed here, House Bill 2257. The reason why we believe that is the best proposal is that there's a specific section, it's sections 22 and 23 of the bill, that very directly call out full exemption from any tax included in the original Senate Bill 5814 from last year for elementary and secondary school buildings, school districts, and educational service districts. We believe that definition sort of has the breadth and depth that we need to feel confident about a full K-12 exemption. Senate Bill 6351 is a newer bill that was heard in the Senate Ways and Means Committee last night. We testified on that bill in support, asking for a slight amendment. The way that that bill reads right now is that it currently suggests that the taxes are exempt for elementary and secondary school buildings. It does not say explicitly school districts and ESDs, but in talking with the bill sponsor and the finance lead, Senator Frame, as well as our partners, we do understand that the full K-12 exemption was the intent of that bill. We asked for essentially that language that I just told you about that's in the House bill to be amended onto this bill. And it sounds like they are planning to do that. They heard our testimony and said they hear us and they're working on it. The other bill that I want to call out for you that is not titled sales tax exemptions, but is now connected is the millionaire's tax proposed by the Democrats, which is Senate Bill 6346, excuse me. And the reason why that bill is now sort of connected is before that one passed off of the Senate floor earlier this week, there was an amendment made that would essentially repeal all aspects of Senate Bill 5814, these sales taxes from all sectors that were included as a part of this bill. And because that exemption is not industry specific, for example, we're talking here about K-12 exemptions, and because that repeal is sort of all inclusive, we just sort of wonder how much attention that will gain, especially from sectors that might not have sector specific exemptions still in play. But the reason why we don't think that is the best approach is because our concern, thanks to Dan Steele and Tom Ahern, who helped us understand this earlier this week, should the tax on millionaires be passed by the legislature and then sort of wind itself up into a lawsuit or in the hands of the Supreme Court, and should this court decide to strike that tax down, the whole entire bill would get stricken down with it to include the exemption that's currently in there, or the repeal, excuse me, of the sales taxes in Senate Bill 5814, meaning those taxes, should the millionaire's tax be rejected, would pop right back up onto school districts and others. So our preferred language at this point is that exists in House Bill 2257. And we will continue to keep you all apprised as to how these bills continue to move. Additionally, House Bill 1795, that's the isolation and restraint bill, is still sort of in play. There was a hearing on that bill earlier this week. It has now made its way over to the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee. We testified in support of that bill, essentially saying three things. First, we acknowledged all of the work that has gone into this issue and this bill over the years and the importance of that work. Two, we acknowledge that this bill is pretty sort of laser focused, direct, and narrow this session, and that given sort of the agreement between all the stakeholders that have been working on it, we ask that it be maintained that way and advance in its current form. And then sort of finally calling out the position that you all have adopted within WSSDA. There's a legislative position and a permanent position that exist on this topic, essentially calling for the ongoing work to address educator training that is fully funded, to expand to eventually get to sort of the full meat and potatoes of the isolation and restraint work that the legislature has been attempting for quite some time. House Bill 1795 did have an amendment put on it to essentially add some intent language that the legislature intends to come back to this issue in future sessions and sort of address the bigger piece to include educator training by 2031. Jim Kalkowski asks, does 1795 fund any professional development for isolation and restraint? Jim, the answer is not at this time. This bill in this session is narrow and particularly focused on a couple of definitions as it relates to restraint. And again, sort of that work to include PD that is funded, et cetera, is work that the legislature intends to do in future sessions. House Bill 2636 is continuing to move. For any of you that attended our legislative conference at the beginning of session, I think you heard us talking about this one on the stage with Representative Rude back when it was just an idea. But this bill would essentially create a commission, or I think it's now called a steering committee within the bill, that would be comprised of a number of K through 12 stakeholders at all levels of sort of building and district leadership, as well as legislators and some of our state agency partners, to essentially take a look at the 28A section of RCW, that's all the things that are in K-12 education, to essentially think through and make suggestions around which pieces of education law are or underfunded mandates, and which ones might sort of be ripe for amendments or repeal, et cetera. So this commission would get together, take a look at that, and make some suggestions. And then those suggestions would go off to a group called JLARC, which is essentially the independent, nonpartisan research arm of sort of the legislature and the state. It's called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. And that group would essentially prepare a research report for the legislature that would dig into each of those mandates that were suggested by the commission and sort of their viability to be repealed or amended, how they're sort of being implemented in schools right now, what sort of the funding status would be. So essentially corralling all of the information that the legislature would need to make decisions around what they might want to take off of the plate of K-12. We have been supportive of that bill. You have heard, and maybe some of you have participated in attempts to do work like that within WSSDA over the years. We've attempted to work with some of our education partners on this kind of stuff over the years, essentially to no avail. So we believe that a commission that sort of pulls in all parties to include legislators from the very beginning could be helpful in working towards some meaningful progress in this area. If you are interested in this bill, House Bill 2636, it is up for a public hearing on Tuesday next week in the Senate Early Learning and K through 12 Education Committee. I will be there testifying in support. Senate Bill 6247, this is the Senator Dozier bill concerning school district financial management, continues. This bill had a hearing earlier this week. That was yesterday in the House Education Committee. I testified as other alongside my colleagues at the Washington Association for School Administrators, Marissa Rathbone, and Flip Henderson, who is an ESD superintendent, testifying for the Association for ESDs. There was quite a bit of conversation yesterday during the House Education Committee hearing. And so I think what I would take away from that hearing is that the Education Committee, this is my take as of this moment, intends to move some sort of policy that is either what's in the bill right now or something aligned with maybe House Bill 2593. That was another bill that was sort of similarly intentioned that they heard a couple of weeks ago. There will be ongoing work over the weekend between legislators to determine what moves forward there. But my take is that some version of this bill will continue its way through the legislative process. Finally, want to flag Senate Bill 6260. This bill is titled Efficiencies and Programming Changes in Public Education. This is the bill that, among other things, would hold 1.9% of a couple of funding streams from districts to the state to pay for the online high school and beyond plan. And then sort of most specifically and recently, there was a striking amendment that was heard on this bill last night that would change the way that state funding works for transition to kindergarten. The original bill would have capped TTK enrollment, and essentially now what that bill would propose is that state funding would only be allocated to students who are at or below the free and reduced price lunch sort of rate, which is 185% of the federal poverty rate. For districts to serve any students or families who are at or above that threshold, they would have to do that either by paying for it out of their local levies or charging families tuition. We, as you can anticipate, testified on that bill. A school director from Central Kitsap School District named Denise Tracy gave some great testimony, really speaking to the transition to kindergarten aspect of that bill. We will see over the coming days and weeks what happens to that. Obviously, knowing that a lot of what's in that bill will also be tied to House and Senate proposed budgets, which is another slide that we've got for you later on in the deck. We're not going to dive into each of these in as much detail as I just did with those that are still moving, but did want to sort of give you a list of, this isn't every bill that has stalled through the legislative process, but just a couple of seemingly important ones or ones that we've talked about on these calls over the last couple of weeks that have not made their way through the process. Specifically, both the House and Senate proposals for school director districting and elections. It's House Bill 1683 and Senate Bill 5861. Both of those bills did not make their way off of their respective floors this week, alongside Senate Bill 5860. That's the bill that addressed school board compensation and required training. A couple of others, the Public Records Task Force bill did not make it. The Accounting, Budgeting, and Reporting Requirements Bill, that's House Bill 2593, did not advance. But I think what the House Education Committee is considering as it relates to Senate Bill 6247 that we talked about on the last slide is sort of which pieces from the Senate bill or this House Bill 2593 might they choose to advance over the coming days. So it's possible that some parts of House Bill 2593 could come back in some way, shape, or form through proposed amendments next week. And then a couple of other bills related to public bid limits, selling property to restore financial stability in school districts, and then the civics education signature bill are just a couple of other ones that did not make their way out of their floor of origin. Couple of other big things happened this week. On February 16th, which was Monday, the state released the updated revenue forecast. As a reminder, this is something that we knew was going to be happening during this week and was sort of the final step or indicator that our legislators were waiting for before releasing their official budgets. During the revenue forecast that came out this week, the legislature actually received surprisingly good news, in my opinion, and that is that projected state revenue through 2029 is up by $1.8 billion as compared to November's forecast. In response to that revenue forecast, WSSDA signed on to a letter alongside of our other association colleagues labeled on the slide here, essentially asking the legislature in light of this news to make sure that they're doing everything in their power to protect K through 12 in this budget cycle. You can click that link in the slide deck. It'll come out to you following this call. It'll also be linked in InSession later today. But in summary, some of what we asked for in that letter was to keep transition to kindergarten funding where it is. Please continue on their path to alleviate the local effort assistance cliff for districts that's coming in 2028. And maybe they should consider funding MSOC at $100 million, like the budget that we had been, the bill that we had been pushing for in the early weeks of session was suggesting. Okay, I'm seeing a question about the November forecast being down $1.9 billion. So basically, they're back to roughly where they were at the end of last year's session in terms of projected revenue. Lisa, we will follow up in session today to share sort of the current status of where they are. My understanding is that the 4-year hole or budget gap, if you will, that the legislature is facing has been partially closed by seeing this $1.8 billion sort of projected increase, but I don't believe that it is fully closed. I just don't have that specific number off the top of my head in this moment. So check InSession later today, and we'll be sure to reference that in our section about the revenue forecast. Thank you for asking that question. That is an important number for all of us to know. Additionally, we're going to get to this in a second, but budget proposals will be coming out very soon, and WSSDA signed on to a letter alongside a number of associations to include your typical alphabet soup, plus the Rural Education Center, plus the League of Education Voters, and approximately 150 school districts, essentially asking the legislature to please not cut transition to kindergarten funding and programming. That letter will also be linked in this slide deck and will be sent out in InSession later today. Okay, It's clearly been a busy and full week for us in Olympia, and we really appreciate the work that you all are doing to respond to questions and calls for action. As again, we could not do any of this work, especially during these really busy and hectic weeks, without your ongoing involvement and action. So just want to say thank you for all your support in helping us to navigate this and represent the needs of you all on school boards and in school districts as best as we can. All right, so looking ahead to week 7 coming up soon, there's a couple of things that we're anticipating. First and foremost is we're anticipating a pretty significant shift of attention to focus on the House and Senate budget proposals. As during the course of week 7, those budget proposals will have public hearings and are scheduled for executive session to move out of their budget committees all this week. So it'll be an excuse me, it'll be another busy one for us. Additionally, the legislature will navigate their next self-imposed cutoff deadline of Wednesday, February 25th. That'd be next Wednesday, as that will be their opposite House Policy Committee cutoff. Meaning that, for example, any Senate bills that are in the House Education Committee, for example, or any other policy committee that are not passed through executive session will no longer continue through the process. So for any of those bills that I was listing earlier that are still sort of key bills in play that are in policy committees that were heard this week, for example, like the school district financial management bill, like the isolation restraint bill, etc., those will need to be scheduled for executive session and voted out of committee by Wednesday in order to remain in action. Finally, next week after Wednesday, we anticipate significant activity in the fiscal committees because those opposite House fiscal committees will be facing their cutoff deadline the following Monday on March 2nd. So things will continue to move for sure. All right. Getting into budget release, which I've been hinting at. We are anticipating both the House and the Senate to release their budgets this Sunday at 4 p.m. As a reminder, at the beginning of session, you heard and saw us talking about the governor's proposed budget. And that was one budget proposal that came to both the House and the Senate. And we could essentially say the same thing to both sides of the legislature, as there was one budget proposal that they both were navigating. At this point in time, we are anticipating different budget proposals. The House will have their own proposals, the Senate will have their own proposals, and we may have similar or differing feedback for each of those. All of that's expected to be released this Sunday at 4 p.m. On the operating budget side, both the House and the Senate will have public hearings on their budget proposals on Monday at 4 p.m. So we'll have 24 hours to see them, review them, and figure out what it is we want to say in public hearing, with both of those operating budget proposals scheduled for executive session on Wednesday. So again, short timelines and turnarounds in front of them. On the capital budget side, there will be public hearings on Tuesday at 8 a.m. in the House and Tuesday at 4 p.m. in the Senate, with executive sessions later in the week to follow. So week 7, like I said, will be pretty focused on budget releases and budget proposals. And, from the releases that come out this Sunday of the House and Senate, respectively, the work from now until the end of session will be to help and inform our legislators, specifically our budget writers, as to sort of what they might negotiate in terms of one final budget that they'll have to produce and agree upon by sine die, which is on March 12th, just a couple of weeks away. Another thing you should have on your radar for it says week 7, but really it's this weekend, is that many legislators will be at home in district where across the state hosting town halls this weekend. Town halls are your time to essentially hear updates from them about what they're working on, what they're prioritizing, how session is going and feeling for them, and also your opportunity to go ask them questions and share your feedback on what they're doing, the policies that they are passing or not, etc. So it's your time to get together with your legislator in district to be able to hear updates and ask questions. In this slide deck and in InSession, we also sent this out last week as well. That link will essentially show you the dates, times, and locations for House and Senate Democrat town halls, and House and Senate Republican town halls have not yet been scheduled. So wanted to provide that. Cynthia, I saw you come on camera. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm going to add to the town halls. So what we heard from our other education advocates is how it's super important to come to these town halls and to, of course, hear about the updates, but also be there, be present, ask questions. Because in the past, they've heard that there's probably one person that talks about education, specifically K through 12. So I would just say that that one person could be you, and just to make sure that if you have time to show up. So just wanted to plug that in.
Thanks, Cynthia. I appreciate that. Yeah, please show up to these. It is important that legislators are hearing from you. Okay, a couple of resources. This one is sort of new that we wanted to put on your radar. It's about the Advocacy Action Network. The last time we talked about this, we had a number of you sign up to join us in testimony training, which was really great. And so we just want to flag for you that our next Advocacy Action Network meeting will be March 17th at noon, immediately following the end of the legislative session. And during that time, we'll be facilitating some conversation about how to navigate the interim. The interim, as a reminder, is sort of that period between legislative sessions. And we believe this conversation will be a good one to help you sort of set yourself up for success and how you navigate a post 2026 legislative session world and, begin preparing for 2027. Also, all of our same and typical links around our Bill Watch, legislative roster, sign in, etc., are all linked here in case those are helpful to you. Our Bill Watch does continue to be updated frequently as bills are, falling off the list as we move through the session. So we hope you'll continue to utilize those tools. And then essentially what we want to summarize for you are 3 action items that you might consider at this point in time. First is think about whether or not you want to or can attend your legislators' town halls, with most of those happening over the course of this weekend. We hope that you will review House and Senate budget details that we'll share early next week. We do plan on sort of a special edition of InSession, likely on Monday, sharing highlights of what we've been able to see as the areas that are most important for you to have at your attention in both House and Senate operating budgets. So we hope you'll take a look at that and give us any feedback that we might ask for. And then also consider attending our March 17th Advocacy Action Network training to kick off your interim. All right. With that, we have hit the end of our update for today, February 20th. Next week, as you can imagine, we will spend quite a bit of time during this call diving into budget proposals that we will receive on Sunday and testify on Monday. Cynthia and I'll be working to potentially pull in a couple of special guests to help us do some of that unpacking together. But in the meantime, we hope you all have lovely weekends. Thank you again for becoming and staying engaged with us during this time. It feels just really like a time that we all need to be doing this work. So thank you for doing what you do, and we will see you all next week. Take care.